it's that feeling of like you've been swimming.
Yep.
And so you're like damp and wet, but now you're inside in an air-conditioned place. You've changed out of your suit, but you're still damp and you're wearing a sweater. And like there's just something like by that memory, I've been trying to like pinpoint that feeling. Also cozy.
That is I just went somewhere as you were explaining that. Welcome to Shoulda Books, the podcast about all the books you should have read by now. My name is Jonathan, and today I am joined by author Jessica M. Felleman. Jessica, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So we were just talking in the Patreon cold open about how we got connected, which is that you were the book agent for the Try Guys.
Yes.
And you were responsible for selling their New York Times bestseller, The Hidden Power of Fucking Up. And you also worked with Eugene for selling his duology. And but you've stepped away from being an agent because now you are the author of Last Kiss of Summer, available from Penguin Teen. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's one of the Penguin Teen imprints, Putnam Young Readers.
Putnam Young Readers. So this is a young adult love story that is very heartfelt. It's very heartbreaking. Yes. What is this book about?
So, gosh, this book is about two teens, Sarah and Luke, whose families met when they were babies because they both were born with heart conditions. And Sarah got a whole new donor heart who she calls EBE, which is the name of the girl whose heart she got. And Luke got pieces of Sarah's original heart, and their families sort of met and bonded then. And they've grown up spending summers together on Cape Cod, where the book is set. And in the book, they're 18, and she hasn't been there for 2 years because she's had some bad health issues. And he kind of broke her heart when they were 16, when they started to have feelings for each other. And so she's just there to like have a great summer in her favorite place on earth. But of course, he's gotten taller, he's cuter, and the feelings are there.
It's the setting. So we're recording this in Boston, Massachusetts. And I got in trouble the other night because I said something happened in Cape Cod. And I was vociferously talked down from that. It's on. It's on the Cape.
You're on the Cape.
You are on the Cape. This book is set on the Cape. And the setting, you do such a great job. I have not been to Cape Cod.
Okay.
But I felt like I had been to Cape Cod having read this.
Thank you.
I love the ingredients of this book are so good because it's like, it's young love. It's will they, won't they? It's summer. It's summer in a beach town. I really enjoyed it. It did make me sad.
Sorry about that. Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah.
That was kind of the
point. You knew what you were doing. But how did this book come to be?
So my agent let me know that she'd heard from a partner of Putnam Young Readers that they were looking for 2 YA weepy books. And she was like, I know someone who can do that. And I wrote like a sample chapter and they loved it. And I wrote the book. Incredible.
Well, yeah, weepy, you fulfilled the mission, I must say.
Yeah. So. I don't know where this comes from, but I've always been like a very emotional person. I've always like even as a kid, as a teen, I wrote a lot of like dramatic poetry that I wouldn't show to anybody. And a lot of my other writing that I wrote before this book, because of course, most authors know you write a lot of books before you get your first book published. There's always a scene I have in mind pretty early on where I'm like, and then I'm going to crush everyone's heart, including mine, in this scene right here. And I've been trying to pick apart why, but at the same time, I also just enjoy doing that. And I'm glad the settings jumped out at you. That was really important to me. I live on Cape Cod right now, and it's very much the whole town of Northport, which is invented, is inspired by the summers I spent with my friend on Martha's Vineyard. And so there's a lot of nostalgia in it for me. But hopefully it feels like summer for people who are reading it.
Yeah.
Before I maybe crush your heart a little.
Yeah. No, it's a perfect summer read. Just don't say that anything happens in the Cape. That's just the one.
Right. No, you're on Cape Cod. It's because you have to struggle over one of the bridges to get to. So you're going over the canal and on to the Cape.
Okay. What was the process like going from being an agent and kind of navigating the industry on that side to then being on the author side?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I've always been an author first. I got my MFA from CalArts, and then I moved to New York to work in agenting, and sort of focused on that part of my career for a while. I was still writing. My agent took my first book out on sub, and it didn't sell. And I thought I knew what I was getting into when when this contract was signed and when these books were being written. But I learned a lot about myself, more than I think the industry. The industry stuff I sort of expected. There's something someone I was on a panel with once at a writing conference said, which is like, no one will care more about your book than you. Even these bestsellers who get these huge marketing and publicity budgets, like no one's going to care more about your book than you. The most interesting thing about myself that I learned was that I can be a little bit of a bitch in my head. I hopefully my editors do not feel I have ever been bitchy towards them, but I struggled with editorial feedback.
Oh, really?
Yeah, okay. I would get a note and be like, that's wrong. And then I would just don't know where that came from, because usually they were right. And I'd be like, okay. So that was the learning process. And then the other thing that sort of actually honestly happened on pub day was that not all my anxiety, but a lot of my anxiety sort of lifted because it was, no one could take it back.
Right.
It was published. It was out in the world. And it didn't belong to me anymore. It now belonged to readers. And I was just kind of excited to talk to readers to see how this book would make them feel, really. And so, that's been interesting. And then on the nitty gritty stuff, knowing the order of things and how long things take, that definitely made the process easier. I asked my agent less questions. I still have a book agent. Every author needs one. And it just maybe made me more interested in focusing on the things that I can change or can engage with that might help my career as a whole and not just this book in specific. Yeah.
Well, you've brought 3 books today that you think everyone should read.
Yes.
And I've brought a book for you as well.
Okay.
It's not in the traditional wrapping paper because I didn't have it available.
That's okay.
This is a book that I think you will enjoy.
Okay.
We can open it at the end of the episode.
At the end of the episode. Okay, I'll put it down.
And we'll give a shout out to Parkside Bookstore over in the South End of Boston.
I've never been there. I'll have to check it out.
It was my first time, and it was lovely. It was lovely. Cool. They had it was a very small store, but they had a great selection, and they had several books from authors who've been on this very show.
No way.
Like Kirsten King, Scott Broker. Those are the 2 that I saw. I didn't see. Maybe there was more, but anyway.
That's something as an agent I've had to back off on doing necessarily in every bookstore is looking to see if they have my clients' books. I used to walk into a bookstore and I'd be like, okay, we got to check every section. Do they have my clients' books? And I do it now sometimes for friends whose books have come out. But I'm more and more just trying to be just go into a bookstore and enjoy being in the bookstore.
Right. Yeah. I imagine that working in publishing in that capacity probably takes away some of the mystique, some of the romance, I guess, about books. Did you find that was the case?
Yeah, I would definitely go through phases where I wouldn't read anything for fun and for so long, and then it would be really hard to pick up something and just sort of do the thing I did as a kid who loved reading, which was just fall into the story and fall in love with the book. And then it just kind of depended on my editorial schedule with my clients' books or how I was feeling. But there was also this thing that I think agents do, which is when you're reading something, even for fun, you're thinking about how you can use it as a comp for one of your author's next books. Your business brain is just on all the time, and it starts to become the thing that happens first. When I first started working as an agent, I would treat myself on my birthday. I would take a half a day and I would go to a bookstore and try to forget I worked in the industry and just wander around and buy a book that I felt pulled to. And that got harder and harder over the years because I would still be oh, I know, so-and-so sold this. Let's see if they got a good acknowledgement. Right. And so the transition away from agenting, I'm hoping will make me a little bit more of a reader first than a business-minded person first. Yeah.
Well, let's get into these books then that hopefully have no business connotations, but maybe they will.
I don't think
we'll see.
they do, but we'll find out.
We'll find out. So yeah, what's the first one?
So I'm starting with Mary Oliver, who is a poet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to pull out the collection so I have it in front of me. I will start by saying that like the way that I read poetry, I think is maybe like, I don't want to say offensive to poets or to people who love poetry, but it's definitely not in like a studious way when I'm like trying to figure out like what the poems mean. I just love like the way that poems can kind of like immediately bring you into a moment of experience that is like so unique to that. I don't know. And I'm not just saying to that person, but like it just kind of is like this beautiful like flash moment of like an experience. And then you can just like absorb it and like move on.
Yeah.
I tend to buy like local poetry collections when I travel. I like try to find a local bookstore and buy something from someone who lives there.
I love that.
To get a sense of the place. Yeah. It's also they're sometimes a little cheaper and they're much smaller.
Right. Yeah. Easy to pack.
Yeah.
That's the thing with buying books while traveling. It's like, I'm like, okay, I've already overpacked my carry-on and my like.
I just spent 2 weeks in Scotland and Ireland with my best friend for our 40th birthday, and I brought back 18 books. Yeah, that was a problem. But so, caveats there. But Mary Oliver, I think a lot of people know her name.
Sure.
I think is Snow Geese. There's that poem, What Are You Going to Do with the One Wild and Precious Life?
Yeah.
Is really popular. People know that a lot. But I find that the way she writes about nature and like the human experience just like really like opening and really grounding. It like reminds you that like you live here on this planet where there are these things and these things. She writes about, nature and animals in like a really simple way, but like a way that kind of illuminates exactly how fantastic they are.
Yeah.
Even if it's like she's writing the line like a slimy toad, like the way she does it, you're like, yes, the slimy toad. I love the slimy toad. And so I love that so much. And I think the other aspect of it is like there's a lot of questions about like who we are, what it means to be human, what it means to be a part of nature, what it means to have a soul. There's a lot of questioning, I think, in a lot of her poems. I find them inspiring when I'm like maybe struggling to write. I'll read through some stuff of hers and just to like give my brain a break and to also remember that like things aren't necessarily so serious. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so in prepping for this episode, I realized I'm like, I haven't really read much Mary Oliver. Like I knew the, Wild and Precious Life. And so I knew that one, but like reading that whole poem is getting more of the context for it. I think one of the recurring things that she seems to, and you've certainly read way more of her than I have, but like, is that kind of idea of like, we are part of this world. The world is not a separate thing from us. Like we are nature, and like, we just need to exist, which is an idea that like, I just think that we, especially as Americans, have kind of inherited this very like, modern in terms of like, the Enlightenment, like that era of thinking of like nature is this thing that needs to be subjugated, that needs to be conquered and like bent to our will. And it's like, yeah, we've been doing that for a couple hundred years and
it's not a good idea.
It's not going great.
It's not going great.
And so like, if we can get to a place where we're just existing in nature,
Yeah, alongside, I think, a reminder that we are not above it.
Right.
And I think, some of the other themes in the other books that I've brought, I feel like I've been in a big nature kick recently. So all my books kind of have similar themes. But that reminder that we're no better than a sea slug or, and, our souls might be nothing more than the shape, than a whalebone that she's found on the beach. It's my favorite poem. It's called Bone.
I read, you said your favorite Mary Oliver poem is in this collection.
Yes, it's in the second. I mean, I don't actually know which original collection it's in.
Okay.
Oh, it's from Why I Wake Early, the 2004 collection.
Okay.
But I have this New and Selected Poems, Volume 2.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like halfway through. And I just, I don't know. This one just hits me. I read it a lot.
Mm-hmm. It's called Bone?
It's called Bone, yeah.
Is there a passage in particular that like speaks to you the most from it?
I mean, I think probably this section that I have put at the top of a novel that's not published. Where is it? I feel like I have to read the first line for it to make sense, though. So the first line is, understand, I am always trying to figure out what the soul is and where hidden and what shape. And then my favorite line is later, and I thought the soul might be like this, so hard, so necessary, yet almost nothing. And I don't know, it sort of pulls on something that even as a kid I did a lot of thinking about, like what it meant to be alive and like what it meant to exist and what it would be like to be dead and not exist. I had a lot of not sleeping over that question as a kid. And I don't just really resonates.
What do you think the soul is, if you had to try to define it?
I got to do some more poetry writing, obviously, to have an answer to this. I mean, I think that like I feel it very physically as a thing. I think that like when I feel a big feeling, it like hits me in a certain part of my body and I'm like, okay, I feel that there. That's probably what it is. But the more time I've spent aging, as I've lost people who were important to me, I think it's definitely something more ephemeral. Like I feel like I don't have any religions that I prescribe to, but more of an energy thing, right? Like I can't remember who the quote is by, like people don't remember what you've said, but they'll remember how you made them feel, right? Like the energy that you put out into the world is kind of like what remains. However, that energy takes form, and that's maybe how our souls live. And that's, I don't know, I like to think that even if my brain is gone, and like my consciousness of who I am as a person is gone, the like energy of who I was when I was here in this body in this time will like still be a part of like existence. I mean, and maybe it will be fun. I don't know.
You know what? Maybe it'll rock. But I mean, I do think that like, obviously this is spoiler alert, a podcast about books. I do think that is one of the beautiful things about books is that like in a very real way, Mary Oliver, who has passed away, is still like part of her essence is still with us because she left her words, and it's like the words that she left behind are still making an impact. Like I think about like the poems of hers that I read this week as I was reading them and just how they made me feel. Like there is like, that is real. Like it's undeniable.
Yeah. And even if like, I was listening to a different one of your podcasts and you were talking about how things don't last forever, right? But like maybe the idea is sure, but like that feeling might cause you to do something that will cause something else, to like a little butterfly effect thing, right?
Yeah.
And so, we are insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but that does not mean that like we cannot feel important. Like in our time.
Yeah.
If you want to feel important. I don't know that I want to feel important.
How did you first come across Mary Oliver? Like what was your introduction?
Oh my gosh, I don't know if I remember. I don't have the best memory. My guess is that probably during grad school, when I was in my grad program at CalArts, they didn't separate by genre.
Interesting.
Which was part of the allure. All the classes were just by theme. And then there was, of course, there's like a short story like workshop class and like a poetry workshop class, but everything else was kind of by theme. And so I'd be in a class with a bunch of writers and, if it was a science fiction class, we'd be reading science fiction. But then what people were turning in as their work was like creative nonfiction, experimental poetry, a short story, excerpt from a novel. And so I engaged with more poetry in grad school than I had before.
Yeah.
Some really fantastic poets in my program. And so I probably at that time started reading more. And she's not from Massachusetts, but she lived in Provincetown for a long time. On the Cape. Provincetown, known for being a queer community. And I don't know, I think that when I was in LA, I missed Massachusetts a lot too. So I have a feeling that's probably when it was, but I don't actually remember.
No, it is interesting too, just, living in LA. California is such a fascinating state, especially in terms of nature. But I feel more connected to nature on the East Coast than I do in California, even though like you look at a city like LA has parks, and there's Griffith Park is enormous, and there's like millions, well not millions, but like so many hiking trails and things like that. But like I don't know, I think there's something about, there's a hostility to the climate there. There's a hostility to the vegetation that it doesn't feel as inviting as like an oak tree in like Massachusetts, or I'm from Virginia, so like so kind of similar ecosystems.
Yeah.
Little
interesting.
milder winters though, I must say. All bets are off when the snow starts coming down. I'm like, actually give me to California.
I went to college in Syracuse, and I went to undergrad in Syracuse, and so after, I think it was kind of a whim that I ended up in LA. My cousin needed a roommate. I was graduating in 2008 with an English degree and no job.
Ooh, hell of a time to have a degree in the humanities.
Yep. And I think it's definitely a different kind of nature. The hostility. I moved in September, and like the wildfires were like, I had never lived anywhere near. And of course, everything's different now because of climate change. So there are definitely more wildfire effects happening that we notice here on the Cape. But it was just such a wild landscape.
Yeah.
And I do think that like, I actually have a friend from my grad program who's been involved in a nonprofit out in LA to try and protect some land that is currently trying to be developed, where there's like some pumas and some like.
Oh wow!
If I can remember the name of her nonprofit, we should link it, and everyone should go check it out.
It's in the description. It's right here on the screen.
And so when you're in spaces outside of, I feel like LA itself is hostile to nature.
Yeah.
In return, that it is just like a desert, right? Like it's a different kind of place than like Virginia or Massachusetts.
Yeah. It's also like what I grew up with, I'm gonna be partial to.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So,
what you grew up with, you're gonna be. Yeah, you're gonna love more.
You said something earlier about reading poetry, and you said that like, I don't know if I'm remembering this right, but it was something along the lines of like, I don't know if I'm reading this right, or if I'm reading this the way that you're supposed. Like, was there a way in your academic career, like was there a way that they like taught you how to read poems?
I'm sure there was a way they were trying to teach me how to read poems. My experience with poetry before I sort of went to grad school and realized the rules can kind of be anything, and you should just read it to read it, was like, well, this is what a haiku is. This is what a structured, more structured poetry experience. And I do think in undergrad I took a Whitman Dickinson like combo poetry class, and that was like, to pass the class you had to like explain what they were doing, right? You had to find metaphor, you had to point things out, and it was just, I didn't really enjoy that. I think I liked reading them, and then I didn't really enjoy necessarily picking them apart.
Right.
I think I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that, and I don't read a lot of poetry. I want to read more poetry. And because I find that like poetry is, and music obviously, and they're very, it's the same thing.
Very similar.
in a lot of ways. But it's something that can just go directly to your soul, I think, in a way that prose fiction, doesn't always have that same direct path.
It's got to take time. It builds.
Yeah. It's building it, it's building this kind of infrastructure to kind of get you to a place, whereas I think poetry can sometimes like get you right there. And it's like, reading poetry shouldn't feel like homework.
No.
It should feel the opposite.
It should feel like listening to a song. I like that you said that, because I think I don't reread a lot of books, but I reread a lot of poetry. And I am the kind of person who like, I hear a song and I'm like, that's the only thing I'm listening to on repeat for the next 7 weeks. And it's usually because like it's making me feel something or think something or just be in an emotional place that I'm enjoying being in. And it's like, all right, looping back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wish that I wish there were more avenues for poetry. I wish it didn't have the same kind of like pretentious, like, because I like in college, like I wrote some poetry and I was very pretentious about it, and I would go to readings and I was very, very performative about doing my poetry. And it's just, I look back now and I cringe. But like, I think that right now, like the incentive structure, like many people who would rather just be poets feel like they have to be songwriters too, I think.
Interesting.
Because like there's hardly any outlets, and there's hardly any way to make money as it. And there's hardly any way to like have a large audience other than like, I mean, I guess maybe Instagram there, you could be, there's poets on Instagram too.
Yep.
But anyway, all that to say is that like, I wish that poetry was more prevalent in our culture and not scoffed at as much.
Yeah, I do think that those places exist. I think they're just like micro communities. There's one of the like longest running poetry readings in LA, I want to say maybe in the Filipino community, that my friend's friends started in Echo Park. I'm trying to remember the name of their readings, of their thing, and I can't remember it.
It'll be on the screen right here.
Yeah. But that was a really great place for anyone who wanted it. It just was like more welcoming. It wasn't really stuffy.
Okay.
And some people did music and some people just did poetry. And I loved that space. And I also think that like, as when you get older, you do look back at your earlier art and you're like, oh God, I can't believe I did that. But at the same time, like there has to be space for that. Like you have to, as a young person, do the cringe thing, because you're finding yourself, your emotions are big and wild and crazy, and you're learning what it means to be an adult. And everyone has the thing that they're embarrassed about, but I really hope that doesn't mean anyone younger stops, doesn't keep them from doing it, right? Like something still got you to the mic.
So, and you know what? I'm in front of a mic right now doing a different thing. We'll transition into my beat poetry later in the episode. But for this collection, are there some other poems that you want to shout out that have really spoken to you?
I mean, I have a bunch folded down, honestly, because of again, for book research. Sometimes I almost never mark up my books, my poetry collections. I do mark up my poetry collections by bending the edges. This one, What the Body Says. I was born here, and I belong here, and I will never leave. Was the first line. And then it just pivots. The blue heron's gray smoke will flow over me for years. And I just, just kills me every time. Is there another one I have pinned? I feel like one thing about Mary Oliver, and I haven't confirmed this, I feel like she has several poems called Spring. Like in different collections, there are different poems called Spring. And as a writer, I have found that extremely freeing. This idea that like you could write another thing that's similar to the thing you wrote before or later, and it will be its own unique thing. And that's okay. That the thing you're writing right now doesn't necessarily have to be perfect.
Yeah.
Like letting go of perfection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it reminds me too of like painters painting the same subject. You know, like you think of like
the number of times what's his name did the church. Sorry. Monet?
I think so. Yeah, I was like, it's definitely
like the one you see
an
at every museum, because it's like there's 1,000 of them, so every museum has one.
Exactly. Yeah. But like that's such an interesting thing, because I feel like writers don't often do that. But what an interesting concept to just be like, I'm going to revisit the same subject, but now I'm a different person, and the world is different. And and see like what comes from that.
Yeah, easier to see in poetry, I think, than it is in fiction. But I do think you see authors rehashing similar themes in different books in different ways. Yeah.
What would you say to someone who says poetry is not really my thing? Like, how would you recommend this book to them?
First, I would ask them if they like Noah Kahn. I'm gonna bring this back somewhat. Yeah. And when they say like, yeah, and I'm like, okay, well then you like songs, you like poetry about New England. You should try one of her like poems about like Provincetown, and just like get a sense of like her experience of like living in this space. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and then we will be back with more books that Jessica thinks you should read. Welcome back. Jessica, you have your next book that you think everyone should read. What book is this?
So this is called A Psalm for the Wild-Built. I don't know, by Becky Chambers. It's actually the first in a duology of novellas that take place, and I could be wrong about the setting, but in my head it's like humans left Earth and like set up camp on another planet where they like totally destroyed the ecosystem. And at some point in the past, all of the machinery like became like the sentient AI machinery just like decided they were done with humanity. So I guess you could say the singularity happened and they were like, we don't want to serve you guys anymore. And they all get up and they just go to the woods and they leave humanity behind. And we're like hundreds of years after that when the book starts. And the main characters are a monk named Dex. And Dex is sort of struggling with their purpose in life. And they decide to become a tea monk and go off around their world to serve people tea and like listen to other people's problems. And while they're out there, they run into Moscap, who is the first robot to return to humanity with a question, which is what do humans need? And I'm trying to figure out how to spoil it. I actually explained the premise of this book to a family friend recently. And she was like, oh, that's not for me. Because I started with the like, all the computers got up and left the wood. And I'm just like, it's I think what you would call there's like a new genre of like cozy fantasy.
Okay, yeah.
But it's extremely thoughtful. It is kind of calming to read. I know I just said I don't reread things a lot. I reread this a lot.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I think the Martha Wells quote on the cover honestly does such a good job of summarizing it. An optimistic vision of a lush, beautiful world.
I could use that.
Yeah. Have you read this or heard of this
not,
before?
No, I was not familiar with this book. You sent me the list and I was doing a little bit of research.
Then that's for you.
Oh my goodness. Oh, wow.
That's because I wanted to talk about both of them. I couldn't find my second copy.
Okay.
I know I have the other one. So that's both of them in one collection.
Both of them together. Okay. Wow. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah. No,
yeah.
So in looking at this, I saw that it was in the genre of solarpunk.
Yes, that's another way they categorize it.
I'd never heard of that. What is solarpunk?
Ooh, I don't know that I'm the best way of describing. I think it's science fiction that takes place out in space.
Okay.
Or outside of Earth, where like the science is beyond what we have now. And like, I'm going to say the punk aspect is that like it's challenging social norms and like what exists.
Interesting. Okay.
The first books I read by Becky Chambers was a series of novels. The first one is called A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. And it was just, it kind of blew my mind. And of that series, I think the second or the third one is actually my favorite, but it's just a collection of humans and non-humans on a spaceship on this mission. And it's like just their like day-to-day lives and the way they interact with each. I don't know. It was just fantastic. And so when this came out, I was really excited. And when the second one came out, I was like, when's the third one coming out? And it was just going to be the two.
Like,
and I was like, no, write me another. Because there is something really soothing about reading this book. Like as sibling Dex is like getting their little tea hut ready, like, you know, the detail and what the world looks like and what their cabin looks like and how cozy it is. There's like this religious, I think I have a note at the beginning. There's like this set of religious gods that the people now worship. And Dex is a follower of, where is it? I cannot pronounce this. Alale, I think it is.
Okay.
But he's the god of small comforts.
Oh, interesting.
And so it's this idea that like comfort matters.
Yeah.
That like having a soft place to sleep is like a right that you deserve, and it like feeds your soul just as much as like food does.
Yeah.
And so that's part of why they're becoming a tea monk, is like to bring comfort to
I
others.
see. Okay, yeah.
But there's also this like really beautiful internal journey they're going on over like, well, what is my place in the world? And like how can I matter? Like they're definitely going through something. So it's not just like lovely hope punk the whole time.
Yeah.
And of course then they meet Moscap. And so they're like confronting everything that humanity did before to nature. And Moscap just has such a like delightful view on the world, and like the experience of how these robots in this universe exist is just so interesting. And then there's this whole setup of the world that's very anti-capitalist, that like there's not really money, but there's kind of money. And so Dex has to like explain money to Moscap, and that's really funny.
Interesting.
But they, how do I succinctly say this? There's this understanding that it's, if you don't have the money to buy something, that like it's an alert to people around you that maybe something is wrong, and so they'll check in on you. It's not that like, yeah, it's like if you're not, it's been a minute since I've read that specific section. So
well, that's hearing you talk about this book. Like I think that it's doing something that I feel like science fiction often doesn't do, which I feel like science fiction is historically been very good at pointing out how things could go wrong.
Yes.
And hasn't spent as much time imagining like how things could go right.
How things could go right. And I wouldn't call it a utopia, because there's definitely still like there's still issues, right?
Right.
But I also think that like the way that Becky Chambers is like design the society is that the society doesn't necessarily shy away from there being issues. They have structure in place to address it. That still like treats everybody with like humanity and grace.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just I love talking about it. And I think we were talking about this before too. But the point in this book that I cry, page 138.
Okay.
The other thing I tend to cry a lot when I read, is that Moscap and Dex are having a conversation about purpose.
Yeah.
And Moscap asks, "What's the purpose of a robot? What's the purpose of me?" And Dex says, "You're here to learn about people." And Moscap says, "That's something I'm doing. That is not my reason for being." And then later I have these note cards everywhere. Because it is enough to exist in the world, you are allowed to just live. Like there's a lot about, because like Dex is their whole journey of becoming a tea monk is that they're trying to find purpose.
Right. And
Moscap's like, well, existence is enough.
You are, yeah.
And I'm like getting chills as I talk about it, because it was, I think I needed that message, I think, when I picked up this book. I think a lot of us did. I think she wrote it maybe during the pandemic.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
I'm curious of when the pub date, the copyright is. 2021.
Oh,
yeah.
Yep. There you go.
So, yeah, for sure, a timely place for that message.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that COVID was, I think, a time when a lot of us became very acquainted with the small comforts, of just like, wait a second, because a lot of them were gone, of like the small comfort of like going to a coffee shop.
Sure.
And,
and enjoying, a chat with a friend in person, which like a lot of people couldn't do.
Or realizing that like, man, my mattress kind of sucks. Or my sofa, it feels terrible. It's hurting my back.
Now that you're sitting on it every day,
And so I think that a lot of us, me especially, just kind of like became reacquainted with our bodies in a way that it had been easy to lose sight of. I'm curious, like, what are some of your small comforts?
I mean, food's a big one.
Yeah.
Food's super important to my family. So just like enjoying, like, honestly, like a really good sandwich at lunch. And because it's summer, I'll say like at the beach, like the perfect sandwich at the beach is just like such a lovely moment. And then coziness, like I love a cozy sweater.
Yeah.
I think like there's this like feeling I've tried to describe in poems before, because I write poems, but I don't share them with anybody. That I can never quite pin down. But it's that feeling of like you've been swimming, and so you're like damp and wet, but now you're inside in an air conditioned place. You've changed out of your suit, but you're still damp and you're wearing a sweater. And like, there's just something like by that memory, I've been trying to like pinpoint that feeling. Also cozy.
That is, I just went somewhere as you were explaining that. Yeah. Like that. That is a state of being that I have certainly experienced many times, but I don't know if I've ever stopped down to note it or give it a name of
I
any
think
kind,
it's, there was, I'm definitely one of those people who, hopefully there are other people like me, like I miss being a kid a lot. Like there were so many like things about just existing as a kid that were so lovely that every once in a while I'm like, but I can try to recreate that feeling because that is just a physical feeling. That's not, you know. So yeah.
The question that is posed in this book, what do humans need? Did this book kind of unlock some new answers to that question for you, of like made you realize like, oh, this is a thing that people need that I don't necessarily know if I clocked before?
I think it was more like slowing down and asking the question and thinking about it at all in the first place is kind of what it offered me, at least. I think particularly because I read it, you know, during the pandemic, and I went from a very busy office job where I was, you know, doing a lot of work in an office with a lot of people to working at home, and had really lost like all sense of boundaries between like work self and self.
Right.
And I think that, you know, there's something I think millennials in general struggle with, which is like, oh, my job should be my purpose. And
wait, it's not?
It's apparently it's not.
It's the first time I'm hearing about this. I need to make some calls.
Apparently that is not true. And I think this maybe was like the beginning of unraveling that. And sort of having conversations with people about like, what defines you and what you need. And that maybe that's not that humans all need something that's the same. But that we all need to be asking that question of ourselves of like what we need. But then also like what can we give too? Because there's a lot about like community and like how the community helps each other and is there for each other.
I think so many of the issues that, you know, myself and I think probably a lot of people listening to this podcast deal with like just come down to like lack of community.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it really so much comes down to that of just like it, you know, losing that that structure that humans had for, you know, we've had pretty much our whole time, and we're spending so much time alone that you know, we weren't built to.
No. I do think that like there's definitely times where I'm like, I need to be alone.
Oh, 100%. Trust me.
Leave me alone. But yeah, and I think the pandemic definitely made it worse. I can't even imagine for kids these days who like didn't get to go to school and like see their friends. Or even just like that crazy thing they did in New York where they were like, no basketball, which was like an insane choice. I still don't understand that.
Oh, man.
But yeah, community was already sort of hard to find. And I think I like to hope that we're moving, you know, people seek community when they need it. The internet has been around for long enough that like, you know, people who lived in places where there was no queer community could find that community online. Right. And I think that now maybe there's a tendency to like look online first instead of looking near you. And like, it is hard to build community, right? Like if you like, are like, I want to build this and you're like, okay, well then how do I start? That can be difficult. And so you can just maybe turn to like the internet first, which are those communities are super valid, I will say.
But I love something you mentioned earlier in this episode, which is buying local like books, local poets' books at different places. Like I think that like bookstores are such a great place where that happens, especially the small independent ones, you know, that have some sort of local component to
bookstores and the library. I will say so when I moved to the Cape, I most of my friends were still in New York, and the other ones were still in LA. I was near with my family now, but I was like, I need friends. Like, I love my brother and my parents, but I just I need to talk to somebody who are not the three of you. Yeah. And the first two places I looked were my local bookstore because they were having a book club, and my local library, who's also doing a book club thing, which is very cool, where you don't have to read the book ahead of time. It's more of like a thematic book club, and they'll like announce the theme, and you come, and the librarians have like, okay, we're talking romance. So like they each have like their favorite romances, and then everybody just talks about their favorite romances. Oh, cool. And you walk away with a bunch of books you want to read. Right. So that's been fun. And those things have I've made a really good friend who's now part of my YA writing group through the bookstore book club. The library has been super supportive of Last Kiss of Summer. One of the librarians came to my book launch. Oh, brought me the amazing. Like card, the order card for my book, which I cried over because my mom's mom was a librarian. And so that meant a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
Man, no. Libraries, hot take, libraries, pretty cool.
So cool.
Pretty cool. Yeah. And I've been to a couple here in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts does libraries well, I feel.
That's awesome. Like, great. Yeah. Cool.
We're going to take another break, and then we'll be back with your third and final book that you think everyone should read. Okay, so you've got your third and final book that you think everyone should read. What is this book?
So this is Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaughey. This is the second of 3 novels she's put out in the last handful of years.
Prolific.
Yeah, and I would say she takes her time too. They don't like come like super fast on the heels of one another. The first one I read by her was called Migrations. And like thematically, they all touch, like, I guess you would slot them under ecofiction. Okay. They all sort of grapple with something about global warming's effect or humanity's effect on nature. That sort of is like, it's involved in the character storylines, but really they're usually like really emotionally deep, like often romances. I don't want to say like in the romance genre. Right. Right. Because those require a happily ever after. Not that some things aren't happy. I don't want to spoil things. Yeah. And I really liked Migrations. It was really lovely. So when Once There Were Wolves came out, I was like, yes, so excited. It came out, I want to say during the pandemic again. Okay. Possibly, because I remember reading it. I remember exactly where I was when I read this book, 2021.
Where were you?
I was on my parents' porch on the Cape. Because at the point I have marked it later at the end, when I hit that point, I cried so hard. Oh, wow. For long enough that my mom came outside and she was like, "Are you okay?" Really? And I was like, "I'm not, because I've never read anything this beautiful. I will never write anything this amazing that will make people feel this amazing. And I don't want to finish the book because I'm so anxious about what's going to happen next." Oh my God. And I would say that her new one, which has been getting a lot of acclaim for great reason, which is called Wild Dark Shore, does that too. Migrations was like a little bit less heavy, I feel like. It's still pretty heavy. Okay. But sorry, I haven't even described. So in Once There Were Wolves, there's this woman who is she's a scientist, part of a group of scientists who are trying to reintroduce wolves to Scotland. And so it's mostly takes place in Scotland. She's arrived there with the wolves, and the local community is like very anxious about there being wolves because wolves are dangerous, blah, blah, blah. Yep. And at the same time, you're learning like about how she's ended up, who she is and where she is, and her storyline with her twin sister, and like the sort of horrific things they went through as young people. And there's this interesting twist that like you learn right off the bat, like on page 1. It's one of my favorite first pages of a book too, is that she has, they don't say it in the book, but she has mirror touch synesthesia. So if you're interested at all in the brain.
Yeah, always.
There's a really good nonfiction book called Unthinkable that covers somebody who has mirror touch synesthesia. But it's when like your brain interprets what you see on someone else's body as happening to yours. So like if you had mirror touch synesthesia and I scratched my face, you would feel like someone was scratching your face. And this is just, it's I think pretty rare. But the main character has that. And in the opening scene of the book, there's the line is so good. She and her twin sister are kids and her father is showing them, he like lives off the land. He's showing them how to butcher a rabbit for the first time. And the first line is, when we were 8, Dad cut me open from throat to stomach. Because she sees him cut the rabbit. So there's also this like really interesting thing about like her and how she relates to people that almost becomes kind of like, and all of her books do this, like everything kind of tiptoes towards the like maybe fantastical, but never slips over the edge.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like a few degrees shy of like magical realism.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever read Parable of the Sower?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
She has. That's so interesting because the main character in that has like hyper empathy.
Yes. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's a cool science fiction thing. But this is a real thing.
But this is mirror touch synesthesia is real. Yeah. And I've never met anyone in person who has it. I'm fascinated by science and the brain and things like that. So I've read a lot about it. The example in that book I mentioned, I think, is a doctor who's famous for having it. And he claims it makes him better at understanding where people are actually hurt. Because like there's ways that like you move your body when something is hurting that like he can see. I don't really know if that's true or not. And of course, like, you know, it's interesting because it plays into like her relationship with her twin sister, and the romantic relationship she stumbles into with a local man in Scotland during the book, while she's trying to like fight for the wolves to like have to be free.
You mentioned earlier that you just went to Scotland.
Yes.
Did you go to some of the places that were like mentioned in this book?
I don't think so. I think that they were. I actually don't remember where she places them in Scotland. I think it's like pretty far up. What do they call those? The Highlands. I think they're like somewhere in the Highlands. And the highest we went was the Isle of Mull, which I will say was just a wild landscape to be in. The island is like maybe volcanic in origin, but it's also temperate zoned, like parts of it like a rainforest. So there's like lots of forests. A lot of them are cut down because it's used for logging. But then you'll like turn a corner on these tiny, horrifying, scary roads. And it's not a forest anymore. It's like this beautiful field with like a river running through it, and the light. It was just kind of wild the whole time. And of course, it's an island, so you get to the coast, and it's like cliffs and black rocks and like the ocean, and it's misty and just it was great.
Scotland is gorgeous.
I can't wait to go back. Yeah.
Did you go to Loch Ness?
No. Did we go to Loch? We didn't go that high. No. We went to Loch Lomond on a very hot bank holiday. So it was very crowded.
Okay. Everyone's there.
Everyone was like, we need to swim.
I went to Scotland a couple years ago in January. And so it was very uncrowded, which was great. Yeah. But it was so cold. It was so cold. But I, as a child, was obsessed with the Loch Ness Monster. Okay. And still kind of am. Although I have my doubts these days, unfortunately. I don't think a lake that size can support a creature that size, unfortunately. But who knows? Who knows? But it was always on my bucket list to go to Loch Ness, and I got to go. And you better believe I was like scanning the shore, you know, the surface every second I could.
Still looking for a flipper, tail.
Didn't see anything.
A shadow.
Didn't see anything. But no, getting back to kind of the almost magical realism. What does that look like? Like what's an example of how this book kind of approaches that but doesn't quite cross that threshold?
I think there's like a mystery aspect. One of the locals in Scotland, I think he's a local farmer, turns up dead. I wonder, you know what? I haven't reread it in a minute, and so I don't know if that's exactly how it works, but it really has to do with like her sense of things, which is a lot, I feel like in Migrations too, is a lot about like her sense. That character is like she has something called the leaving. It's not the leaving disease, but like this need to leave people. That character traces it back to like her grandmother or her mother who like walked out of the house one day when she was young. Right. A lot of it's presented as mythology in like a way that you're like, oh yeah, there is this like thing that's happening. She does have like a special connection to the wolves because she has this mirror touch synesthesia. She is like understanding them better. And like these things are really happening, but then I don't want to spoil my favorite scene too, because at the beginning of the book, the character is very interested in keeping distance from the wolves. Like one of the really early on in the book, one of the other scientists is like, we should name her this, and she's like, no, they're numbers. They're numbers. Like we're not naming the wolves. Right. Like these are wild creatures. We're trying to get them reintegrated into nature here. Right. The minute you form a personal relationship to this animal is the minute the animal's demise. Like they're no longer going to be able to rewild. Like they can't rely on us. They have to. She has like a very hard line there, and that starts to fizzle and like blur for her in specific throughout the book, in a way where you're like, yeah, does she have a magical connection to these wolves? I like to think that maybe she does.
Maybe she does. You mentioned a term there that I saw when I was looking up this book a little bit, rewilding. So that's kind of just like the process of like taking, because they do it for land too, right? Of just basically like taking land and letting it kind of return to its original state.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on this. I feel like the content creator Alexis Nicole, also known as Black Forager, has a lot of content on this that I've seen, because I think there's kind of like this whiplash thing that happens when people with the land in particular, I think when we're like, okay, we've ruined this space, we're now gonna like, even with national parks, we're now no one's allowed to touch the national park. The problem is that like the people who used to live in this space, they touched the land. Right. They engaged with the plants. Yeah. They hunted the animals, right? And so leaving completely actually doesn't help the ecosystem. It doesn't balance it out the way that it was before.
Interesting.
Which I think kind of ties all back together, like to this idea that like we are part of nature. Us removing ourselves entirely from it doesn't solve the problem of us ruining it in the first place. It's more about like, I think the word stewardship comes up a lot. Like how can we engage with the nature, the plants, the animals, the space in a way that's symbiotic, in a way that like we all benefit. And in this book in particular, right, like wolves were hunted out of Scotland, and I think all of the UK a long time ago because they were killing sheep. Right. People's livelihoods depended on their sheep being able to produce wool and meat and whatnot. And if you have a wolf who's just eating them, gobbling them up, that wolf becomes your enemy. Right. But they're at a point in time where like, okay, but there's better protections. And like, honestly, the wolves were doing something for the deer population probably. Right. Anecdote, out of Martha's Vineyard, the deer population is like, there's supposed to be like 15 deer for every, I want to say square acre or something. And there's like 150 deer. There's like, it's a huge problem.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's why there's a huge tick problem.
Oh, really?
So it's.
Oh, deer ticks. Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm kind of like always, these things are always on my mind of like, how do we engage with nature and the world in a way that can be symbiotic? And I think I just like thinking about them. I don't have any solutions.
Well, it's interesting to think of it that way because I do think that certainly a feeling that I have kind of absorbed is that like, humans are the problem. Humans are the fungus on the earth that are like destroying the earth and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, we need to remove ourselves from it. And it's like, no, we're part of this too. We are part of nature as well. And so, like you said, just taking us out of there. One, it's like, if you start thinking that way, you are heading towards some really terrible, like, the implications of thinking that way are horrendous and in genocide. And so it's like needing to reframe the ecological thing of like, no, we are part of this too. Yeah. And so like we need to find a way where we live, like you said, in symbiosis, where we are part of this thing. We're not separate from it, and we're also not leaving it behind either.
Yeah.
It's an interesting, the through line through all three of these books that you've brought is really fascinating. And if you had to recommend one of them for people to check out, which one would it be?
I mean, it would probably be the Monk and Robot series. I just think it really makes you think, and they're short and they're easy. And Charlotte's books are actually not super long. And if you need a really good cry, I recommend them. But I think if everybody read the Monk and Robot series, we would just be better humans.
Yeah.
Because it just makes you think a little bit harder about how we engage with technology and how we engage with each other and how we engage with the capitalistic society, at least in the West that we live in. And how that is kind of like a big part of the problem, right? Like this like growth, this mindset of like, we need more, but like more of what? But like to what extent? But like why?
Yeah.
Like technically we have enough. Like if we could just shift the way we think. But then it's also to think about, it's interesting because like we are products of this planet, at least as far as I'm aware.
right. Yeah.
So like why have we sort of thought our way into this society of this like scarcity mindset?
Right.
And it's just,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think if everyone read that series and was thinking about these questions, and it'd be more.
Well, I'm so glad. Thank you for giving me this. I'm excited to dive into it. And we've reached the point now where you can open the book that I got you.
Oh, that's right.
And
I love presents.
Yeah, we'll see if this
Very
is
exciting.
Something that you might find interesting. So, shout out again to Parkside, South End.
Emily Dickinson, envelope poems.
So this is a collection of Emily Dickinson's poems, but it's specifically ones that she like wrote on like scraps of paper and envelopes, and so they have recreated them. They have like scans of the documents and then kind of like textual reconstructions next to it so you can read it a little bit better.
Her handwriting is a little tricky.
Her handwriting is a little tricky, I'll be honest. Any cursive, I'm so bad at reading cursive of any era.
This is why I journal in cursive, so nobody can read it.
No one can decipher these hieroglyphs. But yeah, no, I figured, as a writer, both someone who writes and then also works with writers, like you'd find it interesting this view into the process.
Yes. I love this. I love a found object thing too. Like, have you ever found like a note in a used book from like
my God, I love
Goodwill or something?
It is. Oh man, in an episode of this podcast, I gave a copy of A Confederacy of Dunces to Johnny Cakes, and the copy that I found was like for the first 50 pages. Filled with notes of someone who hated the book.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
And they were like, I can't stand this character, this person, blah, blah, blah. And then I guess they gave up on the book because after like page 50, there's no notes.
There's no more notes. They were like, I gave it 50 pages. I'm done. I'm putting it down. That's hysterical.
But anyway.
Thank you so much. No, this is lovely. This is awesome.
Cool.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. And again, the book is Last Kiss of Summer. Where can people find that? Where can people find you?
You can find the book at any bookstore. Independents are great. You can find it at your local library. And you can find me on Instagram at JM Felleman, and occasionally my Substack, Stories and Side Quests, which I try to keep up with monthly, but we'll see.
Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
To everyone watching and listening, thank you for watching and listening. And as always, keep reading.